Hi everyone, my name is Holly and welcome to my very panicked wrap-up where I thought I read a ton this month and then I put the pile together and thought, huh, 4 books. What happened? I just felt like I read so much more. So I technically picked up 6 books this month and 2 of them are now among the fallen. I DNF'd them. I put those suckers down so quick and it totally makes sense because I am currently reading the Mistborn trilogy, so my criteria is very high. And I just feel like I'm extra brutal toward the end of the year because I just don't got the time. So let's begin with the most important book in this video, and that is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is my first read through of Mistborn, and I feel like I need to say that because a lot of people assumed I have already read it once before when I haven't. I read book 1 last month and I loved it, which is absolutely no surprise to anybody, but this book is a fantasy that is equally a mystery as well. The whole time I was reading this, I felt like I was reading a book within a book. One book that revolves around Ven and the crew, and then the other book that revolves around the Ascension, the Deepness, and the Hero of Ages. The 2 stories were incredibly engaging to me, which I feel like is a necessity when it comes to this book because this book seems to be kind of polarizing to an extent. Some people hate it and thought it was really slow, and it is a lot more slower paced than the first one, and it can be frustrating to think that the author is just holding back key information. I get it, and I trust that I'll get those answers that I am desperately needing when reading the 3rd book. The sequel is heavy on political intrigue. There is a lot of scheming going on, a lot of maneuvering. There's a lot of talk about war and how to keep power and how to steal it. And if it's well done, then I will really enjoy it. If it's not done well, then I will DNF that shit so quick. The story literally feels like a living thing. It is constantly changing direction and shape, and when you just think that things are starting to settle down, the story will do the total opposite. I ended up giving this one 4.5 out of 5 stars, and now I am officially ready to just bury myself into book 3 and then move on to the 2nd generation, which I'm so pumped about. So for obvious reasons, this book gets the crown of the month because it's the favorite. Okay, so let's change things up a bit and go on to a book I DNF'd, and that was The Royal Bastards by Andrew Schwartz. This book is a total tease. We are following 5 characters, 3 of them being bastards, 1 of them being a stable hand, and another one being a princess. They witness something very horrible and they end up on the run, and they are in pursuit of many different parties. I really enjoyed the beginning of this. It was shaping up to be such a fun fantasy adventure. All the characters seemed so decent when you're first introduced to them. This is set in a European medieval template world, which you guys know I was insanely enthralled by. There was a lot of stuff to like. There was so much potential. But unfortunately, at one point, I kind of just checked out. I stopped caring.
Boo! You suck!
The characters started speaking like modern day, and it totally threw off this book. And the main character all of a sudden started noticing all the male characters' broad shoulders, flat stomach, and toned back, and it started to creep me out. The world building was very standard, and it made me want to run away and pick up a book that had like fabulous world building, which is really funny because I actually binge read the last 100 pages of The Well of Ascension while I was currently reading this book, so totally makes sense. There's all this magic and deadly weapons and kingdoms at war, yet we don't really get to see any of that. There is very little stuff going on, and yes, there is some action and there is a pursuit happening, but looking at the bigger picture, it was very lacking. So I DNF'd this, which only means one thing. It is now among the fallen. Moving on to some actually good fantasy, the next book I have here is Spellslinger by Sebastian de Castell. Spellslinger is one of those fantasy novels that does not take itself seriously. It makes fun of adventure, and I feel like if you are a novice to the fantasy genre, then you will go into this world so easily, and I think you'll fall in love with it. And those of you who are avid fantasy readers like myself, I think you'll enjoy it too. You are immediately thrust into this world where you meet Kellen, who is 15, and he is about to take the first of 4 magical trials to try and become a mage. Unfortunately for Kellen, his magic has all but disappeared, and you can imagine the impact that this has on a teenager. Magic is literally the only thing that matters to these people, and Kellen goes through these episodes of feeling worthless, which can be triggering, so keep that in mind. But we finally don't have a character who is the chosen one. When Kellen is at his lowest, we meet a fascinating character named Farius Parfax, and she is definitely one of the shining characters in this book. She's so full of secrets, she's very mysterious, and she carries a deck of cards, which is a part of the magic system that I found very fascinating. We also get to meet an animal companion, which is basically a flying squirrel who reminded me of Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxy. He just wants to murder everyone and everything, but it's cute, so it's acceptable. What this author does really well is keep the action going. I felt like there weren't any lulls in the action, and it literally kept it up right till the end. My only gripe about this book is that it takes place in a very small area. We don't really get to see a whole lot of adventure outside of the place that Kellen lives, and there's just a lot of back and forth between like maybe 3 or 4 different places. But all in all, I really enjoyed this one, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. So I enjoyed Spellslinger so much that I decided to immediately move on to Shadow Black, which is book 2. This is going to be no spoilers, I promise. This sequel re-emphasizes all of the best qualities that Spellslinger had. We have sharp banter and well-observed world building, convincing characterization, and the world that I wanted to see more of. There is a 4-month time jump in this, and how the first one was centered around Kellen and the oasis that he lived in. We are now in what is called the Borderlands, and we also get to enter a new city that is kind of like a university town. There's an academy that is struck right in the middle of it, where students from all over the world attend. The stakes are higher than ever in this sequel, both personally and in a wider context, and there's a tension building, and there's a sense of consequence in the sequel as well. We finally have the plot set up here, and we are starting to uncover what might actually be going on, and it involves the Shadow Black, which I'm not going to say anything about. I ended up giving this one 3.75 out of 5 stars, and the reason why my rating for this is slightly lower than the first one is because we're still kind of stuck in one place. It's a far away place, but it still kind of had that like stuck feeling. The map of the continent would have been so helpful, and another gripe is I felt like Farius, who was absolutely badass in the first one, her character was a little bit more underwhelming in this one. Nonetheless, I'm very excited to move on to book 3, and by the time this video goes up, I have probably already started it. The next book I read was The Girl of Paper and Fires by Natasha Nagan. This was a very hyped and long-awaited YA fantasy that came out in 2018, and my expectations for it were actually very high, but I'm very sad to say that it did not live up to them. So in this world, every year 8 girls are chosen to be the Demon King's concubines, and unfortunately for our main character, she gets chosen to be the 9th girl, totally against her will. They all go to the palace, and every few days or so, one of the girls gets chosen to meet the Demon King and get raped, pretty much. Let me start with the positives. The mix between demon and human characters was a really refreshing idea. At the beginning, actually had me hooked. It has great diversity, and it approaches some very tough topics. It's an Asian-inspired Owen Voices novel, and some of the trigger warnings for it are sexual abuse and domestic violence. It's one of those fantasies, and I'm putting quotations, which I'll tell you in a second why, where the threat of sexual violence lingers on every page. It was an interesting idea, and some of the hardships are conveyed as truthfully as possible, which I can deeply appreciate, including the female romance between the 2 girls in the story. But I just found it to be so boring. The most action I saw in this book was the very beginning, where I was hooked, and also the very end, which was a total mess. I also didn't like the rivalry between the girls. It seemed very childish. in contrast to the maturity that this book represents. I can't deny that the author has created a fascinating world with a really interesting caste magic system, but we only get to know a couple cultures through like 2 characters. I really wanted to know more about these demons, and we just don't get that. Hopefully the sequel talks more about the cultures, but I won't be going on to the sequel. I ended up giving this one 2 out of 5 stars, unfortunately. It's for sure not a fantasy. It's 100% a romance, which isn't a negative thing, by the way. If you love romance, you're going to really like this book, but I just wanted more magic. Oh, this book gets a damsel in distress, by the way. That's fitting. Okay, the last book I have here was my second DNF of the month, and that is Annex by Rich Larson. This is a dystopian science fiction novel where aliens have invaded Earth and they have killed off all of the adults, and now they are using children to breed creatures to take over the world. The overall premise here was interesting, but I just could not get into it. The setting and backstory were very intriguing, and I found it fun learning about what the aliens were capable of, but I struggled to stay immersed, and I really did not care for these kids. Wow, that sounded heartless. There was nothing here holding my attention. This felt like one of those books where I was just wasting my time, and there wasn't going to be like some grand prize at the end. So I ended up putting it down, but I feel like this would be a great movie. It just really doesn't read well. So unfortunately, it is now among the fallen. Alrighty, so those are all the books that I read and tried reading in November. Tell me down below what you read, because I would love to know. Go ahead and subscribe. I upload videos every single week. Follow me on Instagram at Holly Hearts Books and on Twitter at Holly Niece. And until we meet again, happy reading.